Hey folks, welcome to another exciting episode of Long Shots, and this one is, I would say, after a long period of time where we are all in the same room. Hey Sharad, how's it going, man?
It's going very well, and I'm liking this new socially distanced protocols while doing a podcast. So I'm really excited.
Absolutely, and as you all know, we have been doing a lot of remote stuff, but we haven't been able to show off our new equipment, and we have our first. I won't call guinea pig. I can actually call guinea pig. He's a close friend, so that's all right, right? Hey Anish, how's it going, man?
Hey Nikhil, thank you. Thanks a lot for having me in over here and being the guy who kind of inaugurates the new equipment.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. It's a big responsibility.
Milestone event.
It's a milestone event, and no. So let's dig into it. Anish, as we all know, this is your second, I would say, podcast with us.
Yeah, it's the third time I've been recorded. The first time you never really heard that.
So there is some repeat pattern there in terms of guinea pig testing that goes on. I kind of forgot that already. Anyways, so no. Hopefully today should be all right. And Aneesh, as we all know, runs Unnati, a techno physical agri platform, as per his, I would say, corporate materials. But that definition keeps on changing. So Anish, how's it going? How's business?
Oh, it's going pretty well actually. The last quarter or so have been pretty good for business. We've been able to do a lot of things on the ground. There's a lot of positive response which we've been getting from different stakeholders. So things have been going well.
So just to refresh, obviously you work very closely with the agricultural community, with farmers. You provide a fair amount of facilitation to them, both in terms of financing, in terms of storage, and a lot of other things, I'm sure. So you want to just quickly talk about it?
So Unnati is a agri value chain company which works across different parts of the agricultural value chain. The primary service which we offer to farmers is the ability to sell their produce in a fair and transparent way to large institutional buyers who partner with us. We are a platform which enables farmers to bring in their produce, get it tested, get transparent price discovery, receive payments into their accounts. We've always operated outside the mandi premises. So even when COVID had these restrictions around social gathering and number of people who could be in a system at any point of time, we were able to kind of manage this well because we had the systems in place to ensure or control the number of people in the system at any point of time. Besides our market access, we also do a lot of work with farmers in terms of improving their agricultural practices, ensuring that they are familiar with the right kind of inputs which have to be used, the different practices which have to be used, how do they kind of control pests and diseases, how do they manage the crop once it's ready for harvesting and the likes. Almost a year ago, we started the input sale platform also. So now farmers can also source inputs through us. So a lot of it came in from the farmers themselves. They said, if you're advising, why don't you even provide us the inputs which can actually get us to the right quality parameters which are required by the buyers. So that's been our story. We've been doing some work around financial inclusion.
This has been going on since, how long has it been?
It's been over 7 years for us now.
Right.
We started off the tiny remote part of Rajasthan, and we now work in 6 states. Reach almost 1.5 lakh farmers.
Right.
And it's grown pretty fast over the last year and a half. We've kind of grown from around 25,000 farmers a year and a half ago to 150,000 farmers now.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So, in all these 7 years, I'm sure this is one of the most interesting periods of time because of COVID. We'll not get into sort of as yet on the policy side of things, but any big changes that you've seen in the business, in the entire value chain because of this sort of, 3 to 4 month period of slowish activity, lockdowns and things like that? What has been your high level view on that?
I think we've seen 3 different things, and when I'm talking about I'm talking about exactly about my business.
Yeah.
So there are 3 things which have happened. One is we've seen tremendous support coming in from the government, which is unheard of generally. As in, when you talk about the government, you generally look at sluggish people who really are very conservative in terms of approaching certain problems. But we've seen the government across different states react pretty quickly to the agrarian crisis, which was around the corner, right? Because when COVID struck, the Rabi harvest was right around the corner, which is primarily wheat and a lot of winter crops, which are, and a lot of farmers look forward to the Rabi crop because that's a more assured income as compared to the Kharif crop, which is dependent on rains, and you don't know whether you're going to get too low or too much of rains. Rabi, on the other hand, is slightly more controlled. So the governments in most states were fairly quick to react, not just in terms of setting up their own systems of procurement, which happened in the case of, I think, MP did a tremendous job of procuring wheat from farmers. Punjab, despite the bad state the state was in initially when COVID had hit, they did a substantial quantity of purchase from farmers. That plus even in terms of innovation. So we got so much support from the government in terms of they actually pushed farmers to go in. They pushed us to expand, which as an entrepreneur, someone who's coming from the private sector, doesn't really associate with the government. Generally, when you talk about the government, you look at, okay, the government is going to create hassles, they will make it difficult for you to grow. Over here, the government is actually pushing for you to grow. In a couple of states, they actually gave us special permissions to do input sale to farmers as in deliver the inputs to their homes instead of them coming to shops, just to kind of reduce the number of people who were coming to the urban centers or kind of going to aggregate around input shops. In a lot of places, we worked closely with the administration to make sure that whatever we were doing was compliant with the norms. When they got assured of whatever was happening was proper, they actually opened up the doors. They set up special cells in the district headquarters. Even at a national level, each of the states had a nodal person who you could talk to if you were facing any logistical issues. So if you wanted to move material from, let's say, for example, a place in Rajasthan to a place in MP, and generally crossing borders is difficult in the best of times. In today's day and age, if you kind of work with the local collectors and you work with the collector who's going to kind of receive these goods, the doors opened up. Considering that there was a nodal person who was there to coordinate all of this. So I frankly felt that there was a lot of good work which happened during that time. The initial phases were still very confused. People weren't very sure of what the regulations were. People weren't very sure of what essential services were. In agriculture was, I think, introduced in the second list, which was released for free movement. But agro-processing was allowed in the first list itself. There was a lot of confusion. A lot of agro-processors had to shut down at that point of time because they weren't allowed to operate. But once things settled, maybe in a week or 10 days, and the law became clear, things started moving very quickly. And I like the fact that you could just email now to a government official and they would respond, which is like otherwise you would have had to kind of wait in the waiting rooms for a lot of, as in for long durations at times.
Do you see that as a structural change, or do you see that as a response to an extraordinary event?
I hope it's a structural change. So we work a lot with these young collectors, right? A bunch of these people are in the 30-35 age group. I think they've always been very familiar with technology. It's about what the system allowed. I think once the system kind of said that, okay, correspondence over email is okay, and you can kind of just send me a WhatsApp and I can show that WhatsApp as a permission, and the cops accepted that. I think that's a great change because there is it kind of just makes the entire process so seamless and easy as compared to someone standing in a queue waiting for a paper. And then the issue is that at times you need permission from one person who is seated somewhere in one corner of the district or one corner of the state, and the permission is actually required by someone else. Then there is a transit cost which is involved, and the cost is not just money, it's also time. And that kind of delays the entire thing. We've seen, I hope that this is a structural change and people start accepting this. I think there's always been a push to moving towards more electronic interfaces between the government and the normal public. But maybe it required something like this, an extraordinary event to actually get things moving.
Accelerated, right?
But I mean, like, it's like we keep on hearing that in popular narrative how agri is probably the only sector which was not hit by COVID because everybody front loaded. Because there was obviously there's a food security issue which creeps in, and there's a very small window of time, and there was already some sort of I would say, I don't want to call it migrant movement crisis, but like in a few states like Punjab, where most of the harvest is done by migrant workers, a lot of things were accelerated proactively on that end. But so I mean. Do you think that, and obviously from the perspective of, being self-reliant, a lot of large significant announcements were made. One of them included how to market your product as a farmer, which affects you guys in a big way. I'm sure there must be a lot of noise about it for the past, I don't know, decade or something, right? when it finally happened.
Finally
Did it happen in the form that you would have liked it to happen?
So we've seen a lot of things happen in the agri sector in the last 3-4 months, and there were 3 ordinances which came out. There were a lot of policy announcement in terms of agriculture infrastructure fund, a lot of incentives given to agriculture processing and the likes. Agriculture was, like you rightly said, was pretty much one of the only sectors which was completely functional despite a lockdown across the country. Yeah. Part of the reason could have been that it was happening in the rural areas which weren't as badly affected by COVID in the initial stages, and you could kind of move produce around. It was also important because it would have led to a major food crisis across the country if the actions weren't taken. In terms of the 3 policy decisions which were taken, there was one around the Essential Commodities Act, and there were 2 around contract farming and agri-marketing. Right. The ones which affect us the most are the ones which focus on the agri-marketing aspect, because a lot of the work we do is around how do farmers and these large buyers interact. Right. And in our case, there was always a mandi which was there in the middle. And a mandi is basically an agriculture production marketing committee, right, which is a regulatory body set up by the state government to control the trade of agricultural produce in the state. That is generally for the first transaction. So the transaction which involves the farmer and any outside agency. And
it's like some sort of a node where the farmer goes and for the first line of sale.
Yeah. Right. So it's kind of mandated where a farmer, or actually it's not where a farmer could sell, where the first buyer could buy from. Yeah. So that's something which is important to understand. It never restricted where the farmer could sell. Right. The farmer was always free to sell anywhere in the country. Right. But it did restrict, or at least the states where we work in and where we know the acts, it restricted where someone like us or one of our buyers could buy from. And it said that you could only buy from designated spots.
But it kind of results in the same.
It kind of results in the same, right? So as the seller has to have a buyer before they can decide where they are actually selling the produce. Yeah. And if you put limits in terms of where the buyers are, then there are automatically limits in terms of where the sellers can come in. So it is very interesting how they kind of structured the law. Right. And this little ordinance which talked about defining something as I think it's called a trade area, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember the exact term which is used, which defines an area beyond the established mandi yards. So any area outside the mandi yard is defined as a trade area where free trade can actually happen. Right. And that's what the ordinance did. The ordinance kind of defined a new area, or like a new point of sale, where these buyers could engage with farmers directly without actually having the need to go through the mandi yards which are set up by the APMC boards. Right. So that's what this new ordinance has done.
And do you think that helps farmers in better profit realization, or do you think it?
I think the answer is going to be it depends.
Yeah, exactly. Or something that you stood on the fence for now.
You've already answered. So, Sharath, the fact is, it will take us some time to build those systems which can actually replace the existing system. The existing systems have been there for, I think, centuries now. Yeah. As in, even when the APMC did not exist, there were traders who were commissioned by maybe the Britishers or maybe people before that who could kind of buy produce from farmers. All those limitations were set up at that point of time, and these trade routes or these value chains existed in a certain way. What's really nice to see is these value chains, or these traditional value chains, were the most badly hit when COVID actually hit. Because what happened in Delhi was, the day COVID hit, I think there was a shutdown of Azadpur Mandi, which is Asia's largest fruit and vegetables market, and which pretty much kind of the entire fruits and fresh trade in the country is kind of guided by Azadpur Mandi. And because there were a couple of cases which came up over there. Right. And the moment Azadpur Mandi was shut down, there was this huge hue and cry in the rural areas where people couldn't sell their produce. And there was a huge surge in prices in the consumer end, right? So as in where we ourselves kind of faced almost a 3 times price jump because these traditional supply chains had been disrupted. I think a similar thing also happened in the case of other grains and other products. So it will take time, as in it took time for people to even understand how you can kind of create systems around it. The systems are still not there in place. I think it's a positive step forward, but if you look at how the traditional systems have operated, there are I think if not lakhs, at least thousands of traders across the country. I think there are lakhs of traders. Their sole purpose is to be the connect between farmers and buyers. When you kind of take away their traditional point of operations, or like basically if the mandis become redundant, they will have to kind of relook at how their operating model is.
Sure.
So it works great for a startup like us because we were kind of meant to operate that ways. And that's probably the reason why we were also pushed to expand our operations in certain areas. But we have a lot of limitations, right? We can only be at so many places at a certain point of time. We might have all the money, but it'll still take us time to kind of grow to that level. There are existing systems. So give it some time. I think it's a positive step. Hopefully what is going to happen is, and which I would really like to see, is a healthy mix of the two, right? Let there be traders, let there be auction yards, and let there also be a channel where farmers can engage freely with the outside world. Because
but that's what the current system is, isn't it? I mean, it's not kind of, is it disbanding the entire status quo?
No, it doesn't. So that's the good part about it. So the way they've defined it is they've restricted the areas where the APMC has already got existing infrastructure, and those will be governed by the existing APMC laws of the states.
Right.
Any area which is not a part of that system is going to be a free trade zone. The issue is, and which is where I think some of these state governments have already started raising questions, and because we kind of work in these, a lot of these state acts had already defined these areas.
Right.
So they were all called market areas. They were not market yards, but they were defined as market areas.
Right.
And trade in those market areas was restricted. So I don't know how this center and state conflict of interpretation of those areas is going to pan out. There is no produce which is coming in at this stage. The next round of harvest only happens around September, October. That's when we'll probably get clarity around how the state governments are going to be interpreting this ordinance.
That's very interesting because some states have behaved differently earlier as well, right? There's a lot of states are not behaving homogeneously when it comes to tackling this. Like, how big of a challenge it is to standardize it across the country, or do you think it's even possible?
It's going to be a big challenge, right? And it's going to be a big challenge not just in terms of the DNA of the state or how they react to certain situations or what their existing laws are. You also got to look at the profile of farmers. You've got to look at the profile of the crops they are handling, right? Now, if you start putting in a lot of restrictions in a commodity which is highly perishable, that supply chain will never develop. So in a lot of places where these highly perishable items were supposed to be moving, maybe they came in because these it allowed free trade in some way or the other, and you could kind of move the produce, or maybe it was because of the way the state was kind of functioning, right? As an and one doesn't know, as an if the produce came before the law or the law came before the produce, right? But in general. I think what the government has tried to do is they are trying to standardize the way in which trade happens, allow any agency with a PAN card and a GST number to enter in to a state and buy from a farmer directly. If you and I can go to any shop and purchase whatever shampoo or toothpaste we want, why should we be denied the opportunity, as and when I say, why should a large institutional buyer be denied the opportunity to buy from farmers directly? If they can choose who their suppliers for chemicals or for industrial equipment are, why should there be a restriction in terms of who their suppliers for agricultural produce are? And similarly, as in it also kind of restricts the farmer, right? Because the farmer should also be free to sell to whoever the highest bidder is, whoever he or she is most comfortable with. So in a way, maybe it's a step forward in that direction, but the capacity in terms of the buyer's ability to be spread across the country, we're a fairly large country, over 6 lakh villages. How quickly can we kind of set up over there? How quickly can we set up systems which don't end up exploiting the farmer, right? Because there will also be cases which will happen that the farmer will sell to the buyer and the buyer will take the produce and vanish. And then what is the recourse?
That's an interesting point, because that kind of comes to the aspect that there'll be critics of the mandis, but the mandis probably were also serving some sort of a utility, right? I mean, that's why they were there in the first place. I mean, how do you see that in the sense that what function were they serving, right? And what was their fundamental problem that there was a need to disrupt them in the first place?
The way we looked at mandi was as an essential part of a larger value chain, which was supposed to be that independent and neutral auction platform where the buyer and seller could meet in an independent and neutral way. In a way controlled by generally the auctioneer is someone who is a member, like who's appointed by the mandi. they take a small fee, and that small fee can actually be fairly large in some cases, right? In agri commodities where you work on a 0.5 to 0.75 or maybe a 1% margin, if the mandi itself starts charging you 2.5% as mandi tax, you kind of take away a fairly large chunk of the margins.
Right.
So it kind of served a very useful purpose. It gave an independent platform for the seller to come in, to meet bunch of buyers, showcase his or her goods, and hopefully have a fair auction for the produce. With the assurance that the payments will come to them, because it's in a part of a controlled system. The payments have to be made by the day end. If they are not made by the day end, the mandi official can take some action against the buyer. Over time, like systems often do, they become corrupt, right? So they become corrupt by in multiple ways. Maybe the auction itself is no longer fair. Maybe the process in itself, because at any point of time the auctioneer on a busy day might have to deal with, let's say, 2,000, 3,000 farmers, and that auction has to be completed in, let's say, a couple of hours. So you can't spend maybe more than 10-15 seconds at a lot to actually gauge what the real value of that lot is. In some ways, there was also restriction, right? So who the buyer could be was decided by certain norms which are set by the mandi. And in some cases, which is most interesting, right? To become a trader in a particular mandi, you need 2 existing traders to vouch for you.
Right.
Now, why would anyone want to vouch for a competitor, right? So, because at the end of the day, if I am buying in the same market, I will outbid you and I'll kind of create competition in terms of prices.
A lot of entrenchment in terms of who's operating.
So we found and we found it difficult to enter some of these mandis. We personally did. We managed to somehow get in. There were also a lot of the states opened up their mandis. They required enormous bank guarantees or enormous securities from us, but we managed to get it done. So as it became an expensive thing for us to do, but we did manage to get into the system. Some of the states also allow an agency to buy outside the mandi premises, set up special procurement centers with special permissions, and then there are these terms and conditions which have to be adhered to. So you have to kind of give a bank guarantee, you have to adhere to a certain level of infrastructure to be put up over there. There are conditions around how farmers have to be paid and the likes. So those restrictions are there. I personally felt that, okay, they at a certain point of time as a startup, they become too much of a burden because you don't have all the free capital in the world to just put in a bank guarantee of 25 lakh rupees. But it does mean that you have to lock away a substantial amount of your capital if you want to do that. There's also maybe some red tape which is involved in getting some of these permissions. You don't want to participate in the usual auction system because you, like the farmer, you as an outsider also feel that the system is rigged. But it served a decent purpose, right? In terms of what alternate did the farmer have? This was the only solution, right? So it was maybe a necessary evil, which was slightly rigged.
But like interestingly, like you were mentioning in the beginning, like what Unnati does, like you were talking about price discovery. Yeah. So I mean, this looks like the mandi looks like a classic market making. I mean, if you look at like from a financial market standpoint, it's market making, right? At the end of the day.
Absolutely, yeah.
And price discovery wasn't there.
So, Nikhil, to be frank, what we've seen, and these are interesting stories, right? We work in some of the more remote parts. So we don't work in a Kota or we don't work in a Bhopal. We work in places which are maybe 100 kilometers, 150 kilometers off these. The mandis over there are served by a small catchment of farmers. There are only a limited number of buyers over there. And the most interesting thing is that the farmer, when he or she brings their produce, is still kind of looking at the prices at which were obtained yesterday. So basis that, you kind of take a call whether you want to sell today or not. Now, once you brought your produce and it's up for auction and there is a highest bidder, you still have an option to kind of say that, okay, no, I don't want to sell at this price. I want to kind of pack my produce and take it back. And generally what we've seen is that whenever the arrivals in the mandis are low, the prices would jump because one is there would be competition, but then the other is also they would want to create an incentive for farmers to come in the next day. And once the price jump happens, farmer will come in the next day, and once the number of farmers comes in, it's classic like economics, right? Once the demand and once the supply increases, it's the buyers who start calling what the shots are going to be like. And then there will be a dip in the prices.
And you're talking of of farmers who don't have a lot of operational leverage, right? I mean, It's not like they have a lot of time.
They don't have a lot of time. There is an expense which is incurred in bringing the produce to the mandi. What is the certainty that if I pick up my produce today and I decide to come back day after, I will get a fair deal? So it's still very much a gamble.
Shelf life angle is also there, right?
In most cases there is. So fresh produce you will have no option at all. So fresh produce means whatever price has been given to you, you kind of get it. But in case of commodities which can be stored, a wheat or a paddy, which you can stock for let's say a month or 2 months, you still don't know what the prices are going to be like. Prices anyways are very dynamic. You need capital as of yesterday, right? Most of these farmers are highly leveraged. They need to buy seeds and other inputs to kind of for the next cropping season, or they need to pay off their loans, or the Holis and Diwalis will generally come after the after one of these harvest seasons. So you don't really have a lot of leeway in terms of bargaining power, the ability to kind of say no to the offer which has been put up. The best you can do is maybe negotiate a bit more, maybe get a 0.25% to 5% higher price, but that's about it.
Are there any financial products which are designed in this space to lock in prices, like derivatives or things like that? I mean, I know it's fairly early to get to that level, but is that something that's being explored?
From my understanding, there were a few agencies which have been looking into this, and there is a fairly healthy futures market, agri-commodity market. There are a couple of issues with that. One is the lot sizes which a general farmer produces is very small, right? And they are also, someone will be producing 2 metric tons, someone will be producing 2.101 metric tons. Now, how do you kind of define a lot size when I have to buy a futures contract? The second is it's very difficult for an agency to even implement these futures contracts. So if as a farmer you are offered a futures contract, you can still buy a futures contract, right, with a future delivery for that. What is the guarantee that tomorrow if the prices actually go below or like rise substantially above the contract price, the farmer will not default on that? And if the farmer does default, who kind of bears for that cost, right? So as in there is the exchange or whoever is kind of the one who's created this derivative product requires physical commodity to kind of complete this trade. And the cost of legislation is going to be extremely high. It's happened in the case of some contract farming agreements which have happened in the past with tomatoes and potatoes and the likes. In terms of fresh, it's generally happened a lot. So I think there is an attempt to create some kind of a derivative. I personally don't know how it's going to be created. It happens well in the US and in certain other geographies where people have large land holdings.
There's a scale angle there as well, right?
They lock in the prices. The prices are also more stable over there over time. People like to kind of ensure that they adhere to these contracts because otherwise they will not be allowed to participate next year. So there is an incentive. But over here, people will get lost in the crowd. It will be very difficult for someone to track.
I mean, so here we are like talking about, in terms of from price discovery perspective, we are talking of mostly it's a buyer's market, which now has been kind of disrupted. But still, it is going to be even a bigger buyer's market. It sounds like that, right? I mean, if institutional buyers have direct kind of access without any intermediary, I mean, the dynamic is not really going to change, is it? I mean, it's more free market, right? So, I mean, from the perspective of any operational leverage which a small farmer might have, isn't there a high risk of even further exploitation?
See, as per the current law or as per the current policy which is there in place, the farmer is free to take his produce to the mandi if he doesn't find a good buyer outside the mandi. So that option will always remain with the farmer. To sell or not to sell is a decision which the farmer has to take. What it does do is maybe it allows, and I still don't think that a lot of large agro processors will directly get into this business.
Still go through some sort of a...
So their core competency is maybe manufacturing and marketing of the produce which they are growing. So I don't think their core competency is to work with smallholder farmers, aggregate, do the quality control, do the logistics. A lot of it requires dealing with labor and local stakeholders. I don't think a lot of large buyers are going to be interested in this. The kind of volumes they deal with, the kind of overhead costs are just going to be prohibitive. It might give an opportunity for a lot of startups like us. It might also give an opportunity for a young trader who might not want to operate in the mandi premises and want to have a new idea. It might be an option for a lot of these farmer producer organizations which are being created. There are still doubts about their ability. How big can they become? Can they really take that risk? What if they don't find a buyer tomorrow? But it does open up the market in terms of innovation. Where it will head, I don't think the farmer is going to be at a great disadvantage. I think the farmer will still benefit. The benefits will not be maybe more than the 1% or 2% which was being charged by the mandi as mandi fee, to be frank, right? So that's a cost which is built into the value chain. Once you start operating outside the mandi as per this ordinance, you don't have to pay that cost, and that's something which can be passed on to the farmer. But beyond that, there aren't really any margins, because the prices are still very much being dictated by the large buyers who sit at the end of the day. They are the ones who will decide that, okay, today I'm going to buy at this rate. You can negotiate a bit, but then I'm sorry, you really don't have a lot of leverage over there. And at the end of the day, the price which you're going to offer to the farmer is going to be a function of what my buyer is offering and what my costs are and what is the margin I want to keep.
Right.
And there might be some innovation in terms of financial products. There might be some innovation in terms of handling and packaging, which might help reduce the cost. But it's not going to kind of help the farmer increase their returns exponentially.
But like, what about things like, I mean, you know, mechanization, production gains at scale? I mean, we never see that happening here. I mean, I know you can, like, you know, if you look at land holdings, if you look at the scale of guys, but I mean, even in land holdings, there's a debate, right? I mean, there's a lot of, I would say, dispersed land holdings on paper, but there might be bulk land owners, you know, who are not going to make it public, that they have those kind of sizes in terms of farm holdings. Like, I mean, when we hear every year, you know, in the annual budget speech that you know, we need to look at, you know, really high value add parts within the farming product line, you know, be it processing, be it mechanization, but that never seems, it's a very heavy rock to move, it seems. What do you think can change that?
See, it's a very specialized area, right? As in, especially the post-harvest handling part, where you talk about processing, or you even talk about sorting and grading and cleaning. This is all fairly technical. I don't expect a farmer to be able to do it, considering our land holding sizes, right? So the average land holding would be around, let's say, 4 acres, 5 acres.
That's where you think the penny drops when it comes to the land holding?
So you will have a 1 in 100 or maybe 2 in 100 farmers owning larger land holdings. We do work with a few farmers who own, or who own a small piece of land and who've leased a fairly large piece of land, and they might be kind of doing cultivation around 100 acres. But I can literally count those farmers on my fingertips. Of the 150,000 farmers reach, that farmer level would probably be 10 or maybe 12. That's about it. Most of the farmers are still fairly small, with very limited resources at their disposal, very limited opportunities for innovation in terms of, or value addition in terms of what they can do. A lot of the farmers are still growing wheat and maize and paddy and soybean, which are all very traditional crops with very traditional markets. There has been some innovation. Some farmers have come together and they've created a direct-to-home consumer kind of a network, right? Where they will start supplying fresh produce to you. But you need to be close to an urban center for that. You need to be able to kind of compete with a lot of other players. It's fairly challenging for a smallholder farmer to actually be able to do that. Collectivization might work, but still at the end of the day, the question generally is every farmer is still thinking about his or her best interest. And which means that I will always look at my fellow farmer as a competitor, because we are both competing for a better price. And so I'm not too sure about how this larger collectivization play is going to happen. There is a lot of push around bringing farmers together. The government's actually set aside a substantial amount of money to create 10,000 new farmer collectives over the next 4 or 5 years. There have been a lot of resources which are being channelized towards that to ensure that it is being done the right way. I think till the time people become more selfless, and which is going to be difficult, right? Because you're literally fighting for pennies over here.
I mean, like, but you know, if you think like collectivization always kind of rings communist, socialist, you know, I think nuances to it. I mean, but if you look at, you know, structures like cooperatives, like dairy has pretty much, you know, operated on a cooperative system to a certain extent. Is there some sort of a proxy? I might be completely wrong. I'm obviously not close to the ground when it comes to that. But I mean, is there similar kind of a structure which can be put into the agri frame of things?
The way we look at dairy is something which where we produce something every day, right? So the cow or the buffalo will give you milk every day, generally also 2 times in a day, right? So morning and evening. So it can you can create groups which are going to be working close together because it's something which is now a part of their daily life.
Right.
So every day, maybe twice a day, they are meeting, they are kind of using the facility which is being set up, they're using the system which is going to kind of help them move their milk from where it is to the end buyer or whoever that processor is. It's also a highly perishable commodity. So you need systems in place. You want people to work together closely so that it can be moved. Unlike a crop like wheat, which gets harvested after 3 or 4 months of growing, most of the farmers who are involved in agriculture will be taking 2 or 3 crops at the maximum in a year. They would have smaller land holdings. That kind of cohesion is going to be difficult to kind of create over there. That's my gut feeling.
Right.
Until unless
say you were in the policy makers' shoes.
Yeah.
I mean, how would you if you had a free kind of reign to structure a system or a process to incentivize collectivization?
Okay.
Or to kind of hedge against marginal land holdings.
Yeah.
How would you think about it?
Yeah, I really haven't given it any thought. It's a
super difficult question. That's why I'm asking
it's a structural issue.
Right.
Again, I don't know what the right answer is.
Right.
Maybe the way they've been investing, or the way, and in terms of, it's not just about the money, right? The kind of talent which is now looking at how the FPO space is going to evolve.
Right.
You've got the entire agriculture ministry. You've got a bunch of other stakeholders looking at it. Maybe they'll come up with a solution. I still don't think that collectivization is the solution.
Okay.
It has to be maybe more of like a fee-driven model where you kind of maybe create entrepreneurs who can provide this service to a group of farmers. Whether the government would want to subsidize that or not, that's a call which the government has to take. Right. But there is an opportunity. So I think what will have to be done is 2 things. One question is around the aspirations of every farmer. So every farmer aspires to be a tractor owner or the owner of certain assets. Those aspirations need to be normalized, and people need to be told that it's actually, as in it's not an asset, it's a liability if you start buying some of these equipment. So you need to look at ways in which you can get access to some of this on a pay-per-use kind of a model, or have joint ownership of some of this, and kind of come up with a model where everyone has access to the resource at the right time. Because a lot of this thing is, when you push agriculture credit and when you push some of these, it's also created aspirations for farmers, and it's not wrong, right? Every individual should have aspirations, but there needs to be a large effort put in to ensure that they understand what is right for them and what is not. And I am the worst person to be talking about what is right for them and what is wrong. Like every one of us, we should not be the ones who should be taking that decision, but we just should enable that decision making to happen from within the farming community. So maybe that is a solution. Maybe some of these entrepreneurs will come up with solutions for providing mechanization services to farmers, providing aggregation services to farmers. In a way, this is what we do, right? As in, we work like a aggregator of produce. We don't charge the farmer, we charge our buyer, or we kind of build our margin into the entire supply chain. But it's a service which is being offered to the farmer who are close to us. When they pushed us to start providing inputs to them, we were able to kind of collectivize their demand and then negotiate a rate with the input suppliers and pass on some of the benefits to them and keep a small margin for ourselves. So
are you and are you seeing some venture capital money focusing increasingly in that area in terms of the rural agrarian belt? Have you seen any uptake in the last few years? Because there's a big narrative in the Indian startup ecosystem, like there's a lot of focus on the urban buyers, and now I think there's a kind of a shift moving towards the rural belt as well, with agriculture being one of the key industries in the rural belt. Are you seeing some private capital in through venture capital or entrepreneurs, like you said, tackling that space? And I know, like, micro lending has been something that has, flirts with the idea of, like you said, buying a tractor. So the easiest way is to offer credit, but that's obviously has its own challenges. But are you seeing some kind of activity uptake in that sector?
So we've seen a bunch of people start looking at agri more seriously.
Yeah.
The term being used is agri-tech.
Yeah.
There are people who are operating in the agri-mechanization stage. So there are more than one Ubers for tractors and other equipment. There are a lot of companies which are trying to be the Amazon of the agriculture space, or Flipkart of the agriculture space, where they do e-commerce or like they can kind of deliver imports, pesticides and fertilizers.
Like a wholesale marketplace kind of a thing?
It's more of like a retail outlet.
Okay.
But over an electronic platform.
Okay.
So you can kind of place your order electronically and get it delivered. There are also some players who are looking at aggregation of produce and working. Well, there are actually a bunch of those, and they've been fairly well funded. So there are a bunch of people who've been trying to work especially in the fresh supply chain, to look at aggregation of produce from the farmers and then supplying to either directly or through one of these e-commerce partners or through a retailer. So they become a supply chain partner for one of these companies. There are a bunch of those companies, and they've raised a substantial amount of capital in the last 3-4 years. I think there has been uptake. In the last 3-4 months, we've seen a lot of interest in agri-tech. So in the last 3-4 months itself, I've come across maybe 10-12 deals in the agri space.
Oh, wow.
And some are fairly new startups. There are some deals which might have been negotiated before the lockdown or before COVID actually became an issue, but actually went through. I don't know about whether there was a change in the agreements, but those deals did happen. As compared to some of the other sectors, we've seen activity on the VC side, we've seen activity in the agri-entrepreneurship, startup, agri-tech space. There are a bunch of people who've been looking at bringing in blockchain technology into agri. There are some ones who are looking at machine learning and AI to predict.
I have a feeling at least 3 people out of 3 are cynical about that.
I don't know. We'll need to give it time, right?
I'm just happy about the fact that India's largest unicorn and agri-tech made a lot of deals in the last 3 months.
Yes, India's largest unicorn definitely made a lot of deals. You know India's largest unicorn, right?
Which one?
Okay. Geo platform.
Oh, okay.
We have a history of coming to Reliance as India's first and largest unicorn. They've been fairly active.
And they're in the agri space, right? So as in they will be supplying a lot of the agricultural produce when they've and there's been, I think, the Reliance Retail itself has kind of got these offshoots. They've got collection centers in multiple places where they're trying to buy fresh produce directly from farmers. They've been trying to engage with farmer producer organizations in some places. How successfully, that's a question mark. I don't know. But at least those attempts are being made.
I can not at all believe that the bargaining power of producers is going to improve if the counterparty is India's largest. No, I'm just kidding. But no, it clearly shows that there's some intent in the sector, which I think was what we were trying to gauge.
If nothing else, right, that 1% or 2% which was being charged as the mandi fee will probably come into the farmer's pocket, or might actually be split between the farmer and the buyer.
If that happens, if that's a win, from a farmer's profit realization standpoint, and that's how the narrative seems to be coming in terms of messaging, right? But having people like you on the channel helps us try to gauge the authenticity of whether that will happen or not. So
because I mean, 2 months back, I think 2 months back or a month back, there was a lot of coverage on how urban economy might be nowhere, but it's a rural economy which is going to go up. Yeah. And then I think 2 days back there was another piece of coverage which was like, but you can't depend on rural economy because in terms of income levels, in terms of growth potential, it just operates at a different base. Yeah. I mean, the problem is that it's not like agri was an underserved area suddenly because of COVID. It always was. Right. COVID obviously brings a lot of positivity or a lot of narrative around a couple of sectors, pharma, APIs, edtech, agri also. How authentic that is, I guess only time will tell, right?
So
because it's a tough space to operate in. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the blood and the sweat and the tears which goes into this domain.
It's a very difficult space. It's also very risky, right? As in, apparently the rains did come in on time this year, and then there has been a large spell where there has not been a drop on the land. Yeah. And so there are 2 parts of this agri, as in the impression which a lot of people have that rural India is doing great. Right. Rural India isn't doing great.
Yes.
It's functional. as compared to a lot of the sectors which was dysfunctional. But if you look at price realization, they are lower than what they were last year. In some commodities, prices have halved. In some cases, they've gone below half, right? A large part of the agri sector is also dysfunctional. It's not like, so the entire poultry and meat industry is in a very bad shape. That was also the driver for some of the other products, right? So because poultry is no longer is in very low demand right now, the entire maize and soy market has crashed. And because of which the price realizations go down. It's functional, so they still have buyers. So it's not like produce is being thrown away, other than in the case of fresh. People generally aren't really, there is no shortage of buyers, so they're still getting buyers. They're still getting money, but the quanta of money is much lower than what they were getting last year. The impression which
this
people
is the cynical part of the podcast. I like this.
No, but that's the truth,
like
right?
this, I like
Well,
this.
as in people aren't talking about this. Everyone's talking about how great the rural economy is doing, but the rural economy isn't doing great. Maybe there's been a moratorium on loans, and that's why people haven't really started looking at how many defaults are going to be there. But I'm not too sure about this. The other story is, and which is the narrative which happened, and because when you and I hear about how well the rural economy is doing, we don't hear it from the farmer's mouth, right? We hear it from people who are engaged in the rural sector. So it's input companies, it's maybe people who are trying to sell motorcycles and cars or tractors in those areas and the like. What we've got to understand is the input companies did substantial business because the rains arrived on time.
Yes.
And because of which the sowing happened on time and the sowing was done at a larger volume. Does that translate into the farmer having more money in his pocket? Only September or October is when we'll come to know. There was an uptick in maybe sale of motorcycles and other things because maybe there was an influx of money from the urban centers to the rural centers, because when people did go back, they carried some money with them. Right, and then they would like, okay, let's buy a bike. Or maybe getting access to loans in some cases was easier because you could kind of enhance your credit limit with the current mandate. So because of which people could kind of spend on that part. Does it translate into the rural economy actually having more money and being the driver for change in the future? Till the time the prices kind of stabilize and farmers are able to get a fair price for us and at least get a return on their investment. I have my doubts about it. And because we've seen almost like a 15-20 day spell in a lot of areas where we work, where there have been no rains, and we've seen crops literally drying out, what that will lead to is going to be a big challenge for us. So I am not going to put all my money behind the rural economy. So we'll still continue to operate over here and see whatever little we can do to kind of alleviate the pain. But I think the change still has to come in from the urban sector, because the urban sector is the one which is going to drive, is going to pick up or kind of increase the production of high value agriculture or shift to high value agriculture, then so that prices for even other commodities start going up. I'm not too sure about how.
I mean, like I mean, I agree. I mean, at the end of the day, we are looking at a sort of a macro slowdown, right? I mean, that effect percolates all the way through reduced investments, I guess, right? And while rural belt might be a little defensive in terms of higher ability to withstand, but it'll still feel the pressure, right? And I guess it's fair to say that,
The other thing is, in a lot of states, the government has stepped in. So Manrega has picked up, the payments have been coming in on time. So that puts liquidity into the farmers and the rural economy's pocket.
Is probably more non-farm activity related, is it?
But everyone can take up 100 days of employment. Right. So it does not necessarily...
There are those buffer periods.
So you do your sowing. So farming is actually a very relaxed business if you want to look at it. You go sow your crop and then you wait. And especially the Kharif harvest, you don't water your crops. You just have to wait for the rains to fall and the crop will grow. You might have to do 1 or 2 different sprays and then you go and harvest. So over a 3-month period, you maybe are engaged for 7 to 10 days. Right. There is a fairly large amount of time which is there at your disposal. And Manrega is also, it's not really a lot of hard work in a lot of places, right? It's just a employment guarantee scheme where they will give you money to kind of help with construction work, and there are no real KRAs which are defined. So even if you don't perform your entire task, you're still given this money.
Right. I mean, it was like some sort of a income support, right? At the end of the day. But you have seen that kind of transpire at least in the areas where you have been operating?
So again, I haven't had the chance to go in over there, but that's what I get to hear. So there is money in the, at least there is liquidity in the rural economy's pocket, and it's small amounts, right? So you're talking about 120, 130 rupees a day. So you're still talking about maybe 3,000, 4,000 rupees a month, but that's substantial money for the rural economy.
Right. I mean, obviously, like there's a volume versus value difference here, right? I mean, obviously that's not sufficient to shift macro numbers in a large way in any case, and I think that's what you are also pointing towards.
And it can't, right? It's still coming out of the government's pocket.
Yeah.
So it's not really value adding.
Absolutely.
It's not like you're going to create a return on this money.
Yeah. But speaking of, obviously, I mean, lending is one very big area, right? And that's something that you have also been looking at fairly closely. And I mean, obviously banks have priority sector lending targets, but they have their own biases, or they have their own very, very solid or not so solid reasons of being reluctant to operate at the grassroots level. And many of them don't. Many of them depend on bank correspondents. Many of them depend on guys like you, right? But in terms of from the perspective, you must have seen a lot of loan books in terms of experience data, right? How they have performed. What is your overall take in terms of delinquencies, in terms of how the actual unwinding of the book has panned out?
During this time or in general?
In general. Because I mean, there is obviously a systemic framework which most banks have. That okay, if I have X, Y, Z, that will lead to a decent performance in the loan book. But we see that getting challenged fairly frequently in the corporate spectrum, right? I mean, so that's why I just wanted to square that with what your experience has been when it comes to, because MFIs operate in a very peer group oriented framework. I guess when it comes to you guys, you're obviously originating or facilitating loans
with individuals.
So that's a different dynamic. And I'm assuming it's mostly, I mean, it might be secured lending, but it's not the most conventional collateral which comes into the picture.
So two parts to your question. The first one is how we've seen some of these portfolios behave, or a reaction to a lot of these banks. Personally speaking, if the RBI mandate was not there, one should not be getting into the One should not be.
Okay.
The loan ticket sizes are too small.
Right.
It's very difficult to service some of these loans because these people are going to be away from the urban center, right? So you might have a branch and you will have customers 20-30 kilometers away from where you are. It's also a sensitive area, right? So if tomorrow a farmer does default and you try to confiscate the tractor, or you try to kind of sell off the land, it becomes a big issue in that area. So you don't want to be seen as someone who's anti-farmer.
Right.
So it's a difficult business to be in. The NPAs are fairly high in most cases.
Right.
No. So that's one part of the question. So personally, I don't think unless that's your business model and you kind of price your product accordingly, one should stay away from agri lending.
Okay.
There are certain subsidies which are built in, so the government kind of gives up to almost, I think, 5% interest rate subvention if you give out loans to small and marginal farmers. But that does not compensate for the cost of servicing a farmer and ensuring that the loans get paid on time. The good part is it's generally a line of credit, so you only have to technically service the interest, and that line of credit gets revolved every year.
Right.
So that's how we've seen most of these farmer function. They just pay off the interest and they make sure that their loan account is renewed. I have barely seen farmers actually close their loan accounts at the end of a cycle and then start afresh. I've rarely seen that happen. The second part is more around how maybe these MFIs work and how we kind of are trying to do things. The MFIs work on joint liability, where a bunch of farmers or a bunch of rural folks, they come together and they build in checks and balances to ensure that you and I are both liable for, let's say, Sharat paying off the loan.
Right.
And if he doesn't pay off the loan on time, you and I are held equally responsible. And if asset sale has to be done, the three of us will have to sell off our assets to pay off our loan. So there is some kind of peer pressure which is built into it. Right. The way we work is we look at very specific kind of financial products. So we look at, let's say, for example, supply chain finance. So if there is a farmer who doesn't want to sell off the produce right at the time of harvest, we will look at creating a product where the farmer can actually store their produce in a warehouse, get a loan against it, and with a buyback arrangement with one of the buyers, to ensure that the farmer gets some liquidity in his or her hand, can hold on to the produce for a while. It's generally a 6-month loan period. It's managed generally by a professional warehousing agency, so you know that the quality of the produce is not going to degrade. You have an end buyer seated at the end of the table, so you know that whenever the farmer does want to sell, or whenever the bank wants to liquidate the asset, there is a off-taker at the end of the table. So one doesn't have to kind of get into the entire process of where do I sell it, of and lifting this produce and moving it to a different place. So it kind of becomes a more seamless process in terms of sale for the farmer. Because it's against an asset, the bank is happy. It's an automatic loan payment. So what happens is the sale happens in situ. So the sale decision is basically the farmer has to just come in and sign on a paper saying that yes, I'm ready to sell my produce, and we then take care of the loan repayment, payment of the warehousing dues, payment of the remaining to the farmer's account, transfer of title, movement of goods to the buyer. So we kind of take care of a lot of these other transactions, and that's why it works well.
It works well.
So it works well in the sense that there are zero NPAs, right? Is there an uptake? No, we haven't really seen the kind of response which we thought we would see. So when we started this off, we thought everyone would lap it up. It's the most obvious thing to do, right?
Are there like enforcement challenges at your end, or?
Not really. It's generally just farmers are like, why should I pay interest? Why do I have to pay warehousing dues? I will keep it at my home itself.
There's a fair bit of like education which goes in.
So we've tried to educate, right? But the farmer also takes a calculated decision, right? The farmer says that I'll hold on to the produce for 15 days. But for me to come to you and store the produce, you will charge me a month's rent. You will charge insurance fees on that. Then there'll be a bank charge which will be built on that. I might just hold on to the produce for 15 days. Or maybe there are also similar systems which are run by traditional traders. So they will just go and keep the produce at the trader's place, pick up, and these traders also double up as money lenders, right? They will lend them some money, and then maybe after 2 months or 3 months, they will sell off this produce to this trader itself. So it's that informal sector works at a much cheaper cost. There is no warehousing cost which is built in. There is no special handling cost which is built in. All of those will have to be built in a system like ours. They can then store it for 8 months or 10 months or 2 years if they want. Over here, there are restrictions in terms of for how long you can store this produce. So we haven't really seen that adoption at that higher rate. Maybe at some point of time it will rise, but I still don't think it's going to happen that quickly. We've also seen commodity markets behave pretty absurdly recently. So we've seen prices being higher during harvest, and they're actually going down 2 months later. So there is also this fear amongst the farmer, and it's a very genuine fear, right? Who takes the risk if it goes down? And Sharath was talking about derivative products. Maybe some of those can be built, but then there'll still be a cost attached to that. Who kind of bears that cost? So those questions still need to be answered till the time we can figure it out. The other thing which we are trying to do is we are trying to create, it's an unsecured loan product where we are working with the bank to see if we can, and we are putting in a first loss default guarantee ourselves to see if for a select group of farmers who we are comfortable working with, and this is to start off with, to kind of help create the model, can we work with this group and create an input loan for them? So which allows them to buy the right kind of input. So you restrict the end use, which ensures that the farmer uses the right kind of inputs. You also track farmers' behavior in terms of what inputs they are using and how they are using, and if there are any red flags, take corrective action accordingly. And then finally, the end aspiration is that you want the farmer to start growing produce which is suitable most for one of our partner buyers. And you know that there is some premium which is built into that entire purchase, right? So you slowly start providing this kind of an input. So it's a way to ensure that farmers are using the right inputs and right practices to grow the produce which will fetch them a better price. And because we will be the people who will be buying this produce, it's in a way a kind of a closed loop semi-secured.
It's almost secured with receivables in a way. Right?
So, but then you still don't have a guarantee that you will always get the produce. So you will get the produce because you know that there is a higher price which is being paid by the buyer.
And you forecasted the demand, so you're fairly certain.
So that's a closed loop system which we are trying to create. It's still early days for us. We're just doing those pilots.
It's also like it has parallels to leasing also, right? In a way. I mean, I know in terms of books, it's not sitting on your book.
It's not on our books.
From the perspective of control in terms of end use.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a few parallels there as well, right?
It is, yes, and it's very much like they work like an extension of the organization at that point of time, then, right? Because they interact with us more often. We are able to track their production systems better. Because of that, we are able to offer advisory services better. The end produce is being tracked better. It's a win-win for everyone in the system, right? It kind of creates a more stable demand for inputs in a way, which helps us to negotiate better deals with the input suppliers, which then helps us to pass on these benefits to the farmer. So they get access to better loans, they get access to better quality inputs at subsidized rates, with the assurance that there will be a buyer at the end of the table who's going to be paying them a premium for their produce. So, and that's the only model which you can work out with. So if you have to do an unsecured kind of a product, there has to be an incentive for everyone to participate in that.
So that's something which is kind of right now being like introduced.
It's very early stage. So we kind of treading with caution. We are not a lending agency and we don't want to burn our fingers in the process.
Right. Interesting. And oh man, it's been just 1 hour and 2 minutes.
Oh, not bad.
And with us time just flies. And, so no, this was quite insightful and
very relevant.
Very relevant, and a bit of cynicism also thrown in, just for additional flavor, which I always like. That reality check. I think
someone needs to present the reality.
Someone needs to present the reality. So that's always a breath of fresh air. Thanks a lot, Aneesh.
My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure having you, and all the best for. I think 2020 has been a fairly busy year.
It has
been.
Yeah.
Hope it only goes busier and busier for you. And I'm sure you'll have an interface with India's largest unicorn at some stage.
So, we'll have you come in again when we upgrade our studio system.
For sure. Maybe before that as well, right? I mean, that always is a fair amount of fun. I think it's been a nice session, and we'll be back. Hopefully soon. We have a line of interesting guests, but we'll kind of
all over the phone though. All over the phone.
So one is definitely in person. Okay. 2 on the phone. 1 also overseas. So we have to first figure out that setup.
Okay.
Before I kind of get carried away. And so we'll be back pretty soon. This is Nikhil Arora.
This is Sharat Tupran
signing off.